Dad, you're not well. This house is too much for you. We've talked, and it's time for you to leave.
You're throwing me out of my own home? Merry Christmas, Michael.
Christmas dinner smelled like turkey and betrayal. My son, Michael, stood at the head of the table, his wine glass raised high, and with a voice as cold as the winter air outside, he disowned me in front of our entire family. He declared I was no longer welcome, that I had to leave the very home I built. They thought they had me cornered, an old man to be cast aside. But as his wife, Emily, smirked from her seat, I smiled right back, handing him a simple manila folder. "A little Christmas gift," I said. He had no idea that inside that folder was the beginning of his end, and the start of my sweet revenge. They thought they had destroyed me, but they didn't know who they were messing with. Before we dive into how I turned the tables, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support means the world. The dining room felt less like a home and more like a courtroom. The air was thick with resentment, so heavy you could taste it alongside the roasted potatoes. The old oak table, a silent witness to decades of family dinners, now bore the scratches of our latest battle. Dirty plates sat untouched, the food I'd spent all afternoon preparing now just a cold monument to our broken family. Michael stood at the head, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and cheap wine, gesturing wildly like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. Across from me, Emily sat with her arms crossed, a fortress of disapproval. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped a rhythm of pure disdain against her silk blouse. I gripped my fork, its cold, hard metal the only thing grounding me as their words, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the air. "Dad, we need the money," Michael snapped, his voice high and tight. "This house is falling apart. You can't just sit on your savings while we're stuck living in a museum. She wanos and the das con of these pertation, but the other wise." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my own voice dangerously even. "Stuck here? I paid the mortgage on this place before you were even a thought, Michael. I built it with my own 2 hands. You live here, rent-free. What's this really about?" Emily leaned forward, her smile as thin and brittle as the ice forming on the window panes. "It's about progress, Henry. We want to modernize. New floors, new appliances, a new look. It's something you just wouldn't understand." Oh, I understood plenty. The so-called repairs were nothing but a flimsy excuse. I'd seen the screen of Emily's phone propped against her wine glass. It displayed a glossy photo of a leather sectional sofa that cost more than my old pickup truck. Michael, who had started pacing the length of the dining room like a caged animal, threw a folded piece of paper onto the table. It was a contractor's estimate, bloated with thousands of dollars in unnecessary cosmetic upgrades. They hadn't just thought about spending the money. In their minds, it was already spent. "You've got savings, Dad," Michael pressed on, his voice rising with entitlement. "What's the point of it just sitting in a bank account? You're not getting any younger." The jab about my age stung, a deliberate, cruel little twist of the knife. I kept my eyes on the table, my finger tracing a familiar scratch in the wood, a scar from the time a 10-year-old Michael had carved his initials into it with a butter knife. I remembered that day. He'd looked at me with such adoration then, like I was his hero, the strongest man in the world. Where had that boy gone? "I've given you enough," I said quietly, the words feeling inadequate. "You live in my home, you eat my food, you pay no bills. That's more than most people your age get." "Levin, stand of the weight." Emily let out a short, sharp scoff. It was a sound like a blade being wrapped in silk. "Rent-free? Henry, this place is a relic. We're doing you a favor by staying here, by keeping you company." Michael slammed his spoon down on the table, the clatter echoing in the tense silence. "You're so damn selfish," he yelled, his face contorting with rage. "You act like you're some kind of saint, but you're just a bitter old man holding us back." What of the cond? The room fell completely silent then, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I tightened my grip on the fork, my knuckles turning white. It wasn't the first time he'd raised his voice at me, not since Emily came into the picture, but this felt different. This felt final. Emily's eyes glinted with a sick sort of triumph, as if she'd been waiting for this very explosion, goading him toward it. I could have shouted back. I could have listed every sacrifice, every overtime shift I worked to pay for his college tuition, every dream of my own I'd put on hold for him, the classic car I sold without a second thought to buy him his first junker. But what was the point? Words wouldn't reach them anymore. They were speaking a different language now, the language of greed. "Selfish," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. That's what you really think of me? Michael leaned closer, his breath hot and sour with wine. You're damn right, he spat. We don't need you anymore, Dad. We can handle this place just fine without you. The air thickened, his ugly words sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Emily's lips twitched, just barely suppressing a victorious smile. They thought they'd won. I deliberately set my fork down next to my cold plate and stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound that felt deafening in the silence. I looked at Michael, my son, and then at Emily, his wife. Their faces were a perfect mirror of greed and absolute certainty. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the fire churning in my gut. You've made yourselves perfectly clear. I turned, my boots feeling heavy as lead on the floor, and walked toward the hallway. Michael's mocking voice followed me. What? That's it? You're just gonna run off and sulk in your room? I didn't answer. The dining room door, with its chipped white paint, a reminder of happier days, loomed ahead. As I reached for the doorknob, a single thought burned through the fog of betrayal. I had given him everything. My time, my dreams, my home. No more. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling their voices, but not their victory. I stood in the dark hallway, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock slowly steadying my pulse. They thought they could break me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I was going to show them what selfish really meant. My bedroom was a time capsule, every corner holding the ghost of a life I'd built and was now in danger of losing. The old wooden bed creaked under my weight as I sat down, the mattress sagging from years of restless nights. A single lamp cast a warm, lonely glow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the silver frame on my nightstand. It was a photo of my late wife, Elizabeth, and a 6-year-old Michael. His gap-toothed grin stared back at me, a phantom from a past so distant it felt like it belonged to someone else. How could that happy little boy have turned into the man who had just screamed that I wasn't needed? The house was eerily silent now, the kind of oppressive quiet that amplifies every thought. I opened the drawer of the bedside table and pulled out an old photo album, its leather cover worn smooth by the touch of my hands and Elizabeth's over the years. I flipped through the plastic-covered pages, each photo a small stab to the heart. I stopped at a picture of Michael at 16, holding a football, his eyes bright with the kind of dreams I had worked myself to the bone to fund. I'd sold my prized Chevy to pay for his college applications, a car I'd spent years restoring. I told Elizabeth it was just a hunk of metal, but she knew better. She squeezed my hand, her warm smile telling me she saw the sacrifice, and we both agreed it was worth it. Another page, another memory. Michael's college graduation. I had worked double shifts for 4 straight years to cover his tuition, my back a constant, screaming ache from long hours on construction sites. He'd hugged me that day, his graduation cap askew, and promised he would make me proud. I had believed him. Now, that memory was just another source of pain. He'd never even said thank you, not once in all the years since. After Elizabeth's cancer took her 3 years ago, he drifted even further away, leaving me to rattle around this big, empty house by myself. Until Emily came along, her sharp ambition sinking its claws into him, poisoning him against me. I turned the page, and a folded, yellowed receipt fell out. It was a tuition payment for $12,000, dated 2005. I had drained my savings for that, telling myself it was an investment in his future. And in my future, too, I had thought. I was investing in someone to carry on the family name, to share the life I'd built. Instead, he brought home Emily, whose cold eyes sized up my house the first time she walked in, not as a home, but as a prize to be won. She changed him, or maybe she just gave him permission to become the person he'd always been deep down. I snapped the album shut and set it aside, my gaze falling back on Elizabeth's photo. Her soft curls, her warm eyes, they had always been my anchor. I tried, Liz, I whispered, my voice rough with unshed tears. I gave him everything. But trying wasn't enough, not when he was willing to stand in my dining room and spit venom at me, all while being egged on by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. I stood and crossed to the window. Outside, snow was falling in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the quiet street in a pristine layer of white. The neighbors' Christmas lights blinked softly through the haze. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, my weary reflection staring back at me. Gray hair, tired eyes, but a jaw set with a new, unfamiliar purpose. I had spent decades being the father who provided, who forgave, who waited patiently for a thank you that never came. And for what? To be told I wasn't needed, to be treated like a guest in my own home. I picked up my phone from the nightstand, its screen glowing in the dim room. My thumb hovered over the number for my oldest friend, Tom. He was a retired lawyer, a man who'd seen the world's ugliness and still came out swinging. He would know where to start. The snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the old world. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I had been their foundation for far too long. It was time to show them what happens when that foundation develops a crack. It was time to build something new on their ruins. The old pub, the Oak Barrel, smelled of whiskey and worn leather. Its dim lights cast long, dancing shadows across the dark wooden paneling. I sat in a corner booth, the cracked vinyl seat creaking as I leaned forward, my hands wrapped around a glass of bourbon I had no intention of drinking. Across from me, Tom sipped his beer. He'd been my best friend since we were young engineers arguing over blueprints, back when life was simpler. Now, he was a retired lawyer with a razor-sharp mind and a knack for cutting through nonsense. I told him everything. Michael's shouting, Emily's smug smirks, the way they tried to gut me with their words in my own dining room. Tom listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing, the lines on his face deepening with every ugly detail. When I finished, he set his glass down with a heavy thud. "They're vultures, Henry," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "They think they can peck you apart because you're getting older. Are you going to let them?" I swirled the bourbon in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "No," I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. "I'm done letting them do anything." A slow grin spread across Tom's face, a rare sight that usually meant trouble for someone. "Good. Then you hit them where it hurts. Their money, their pride. Find their weak spot and press down until something breaks." I nodded, my mind already racing. Michael was impulsive, a child in a man's body, always chasing the next shiny thing, a new car, a bigger TV, anything to fill the emptiness inside him. Emily was worse. Her entire identity was tied to appearances. Her social media was a carefully curated shrine to a luxurious life she couldn't possibly afford. They thought they could bully me out of my home. I would show them what a lifetime of careful planning and methodical execution could do. Legally, of course, I added, meeting Tom's gaze. He chuckled, leaning back in the booth, spoken like the guy who used to double-check every single contract I ever wrote. "You've got this, Henry. They have no idea who they're messing with." I pulled a small notebook and a pen from my coat pocket and flipped it open. On the first clean page, I wrote the word accounts. Michael's finances had to be a mess. I'd seen the late notices he tried to shove to the bottom of the mail pile. I'd noticed the way Emily would flinch whenever a credit card reader took a second too long to approve a purchase. That was my starting point. "You're scarier than I thought," Tom said, raising his glass. "To justice." I clinked my glass against his. "To consequences." Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You sure about this, Henry? Once you start down this road, there's no turning back. It's going to get ugly." I met his eyes, my own gaze unwavering. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then don't flinch. When you start tightening the screws, they're going to squirm. Let them." I stood, tossing a few bills on the table to cover the drinks. The bourbon sat untouched, its surface perfectly still. "Thanks, Tom. I'll call you if I need you." He waved me off. "Don't call, just do it." The heavy door of the pub groaned as I pushed it open, the frigid night air biting at my face. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked down the empty sidewalk, my mind clearer than it had been in years. Michael thought he could erase me. Emily thought she could outsmart me. They had built their fragile, fake lives on my foundation, and I knew exactly where all the structural weaknesses were. I walked on, the snow falling heavier now, each delicate flake a silent promise of the blizzard I was about to unleash. Later that night, the kitchen was pitch black, save for the narrow beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the shadows. The oak table, usually a place for family meals and quiet cups of coffee, was now my battlefield. It was littered with the evidence of their carelessness, scattered bills, crumpled receipts, and a stark bank notice. Michael had left them out, as arrogant and sloppy as always, assuming I was too old or too stupid to notice. I moved quietly, my old sweater catching on the corner of a chair as I leaned over the mess. Each document was a window into their chaotic, debt-ridden world, and I was about to smash it wide open. I picked up a credit card statement, the numbers glaring under the harsh light. $12,000 in debt, spread across designer clothes I'd never seen Emily wear and tabs at restaurants I couldn't imagine them affording. Emily's name was on half the charges, including a $2,000 handbag that could have paid the heating bill for the entire winter. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. She had the nerve to mock my outdated house while she was burning through money they didn't have. Michael was no better. Late payments on his car, a gym membership he hadn't used in months. Their greed was a house of cards, and I was about to pull out the bottom one. My fingers paused on a bank notice, the word overdue stamped across the top in aggressive red ink. They'd missed 2 mortgage payments on a small condo they'd bought as an investment last year. Michael had bragged about it endlessly at dinner one night, claiming it was going to make them rich. Emily had nodded along, her eyes gleaming as she scrolled through pictures of luxury lofts on her phone. Now, the bank was threatening foreclosure. I carefully scribbled the account number and the bank's contact information in my notebook. The scratch of my pen sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I leaned against the counter, the cold tile seeping through my clothes, and suddenly remembered Emily at dinner last week. Her voice, dripping with disdain, had called my dining room carpet tacky. She'd waved her fork around like a scepter, declaring that the house needed modern elegance. Michael had laughed and agreed, while I'd stared at the family photos on the wall, wondering when my son had stopped seeing this place as his home. That carpet had been Elizabeth's choice. We had spent hours at the store debating patterns. They wanted to rip it out, to erase her, to erase me. A sudden creak from the hallway made me freeze. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flicked off the flashlight, plunging the kitchen into absolute darkness. I pressed myself against the counter, every muscle tensed, listening. It was just the old house groaning, settling for the night. I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. They were upstairs, sound asleep, completely oblivious to the trap they had so carefully set for themselves. I turned the light back on and continued my search. A receipt for a Wine of the Month club, another for a spa day. Emily had desperately needed. Every line item was another thread in the web of their deceit, and I was meticulously mapping it all out. My engineering days had taught me to find the weak points, the hidden cracks in a structure that could bring the whole thing crashing down. Their finances weren't just cracked, they were crumbling, and I was about to trigger the earthquake. The notebook in my hand grew heavier with each new entry. Dates, amounts, account numbers. It was becoming a dossier of their downfall. I carefully folded the bank's foreclosure notice and tucked it into my pocket. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. It was about showing them I wasn't the senile old relic they wanted me to be. Another creak, closer this time. Footsteps, slow and heavy, descending the stairs. Michael. I snapped the notebook shut, shoved it deep into my pocket, and quickly returned the papers to their messy pile on the table. The flashlight went off just as I slipped silently toward the kitchen door. I paused, listening as the footsteps stopped right outside. "Dad?" Michael's voice was groggy, but laced with suspicion. I held my breath. My pulse was steady, my mind sharp as a razor. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed, all wrapped up in their own carelessness. I eased the door open a crack, the hinges blessedly silent thanks to years of my own maintenance. The hallway was dark, but I could see Michael's large shadow looming at the far end. I slipped through the opening and melted into the shadows of the house. I knew better than they ever would. The lawyer's office downtown was all glass and cool gray tones, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in clutter of my home. I sat across a polished mahogany desk from John, a lawyer I'd known from my engineering days. He was sharp, discreet, and didn't waste words. My old coat was draped over the back of the chair, and a folder filled with my notes lay open in front of me. John scanned my scribbled figures, his pen clicking rhythmically. "You're sure about this, Henry?" he asked, his eyes flicking up from the page. "It's a bold move." "They crossed a line, John," I said, my hands steady on the table. "I'm just taking back what's mine." He leaned back, tapping the pen against his chin. "All right, let's start with the will. You want Michael out of it completely?" "Completely." The word felt heavy, final. For a fleeting moment, a pang of guilt hit me. This was still my son, the little boy who used to cling to my hand at the state fair. But that boy was gone, replaced by a greedy stranger who had spat in my face. I pushed the memory away and focused on the papers. John slid across the desk toward me. The first was a revised will. I read every line, my old contract reviewing habits kicking in. The house, my savings, my pension, everything was to be left to a local children's charity Elizabeth had always supported. Michael and Emily wouldn't see a single dime. I signed on the dotted line. The scratch of the pen was the sound of a quiet victory. The next document was a bank form to freeze the joint account I'd set up for Michael years ago to help him buy his first car. He'd never bothered to close it, and now that laziness was about to cost him. I pulled out my phone, dialed the bank's 24-hour line, and after confirming my identity, the account was locked. Michael wouldn't find out until his next purchase was declined. I could almost picture his confusion turning to panic. We moved on to the house. John suggested putting the property into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee. This way, they can't force a sale or claim any ownership, he explained. And if they try to push you out, this gives you the legal high ground to have them removed. I nodded, signing where he pointed. That house was my fortress, the one thing I had built that still felt strong and true. I had poured my life into its foundation, and I'd be damned if I let them turn it into their personal ATM. As I stepped toward the door to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a missed call from Michael. My pulse quickened, but I didn't answer. He was already feeling the ground shift beneath his feet, even if he didn't know why yet. The office door closed softly behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold Chicago wind biting through my coat. Michael's call meant he was rattled. And that was just the beginning. Let him squirm. I had more work to do. That night, I became a ghost in my own home. I stood in the kitchen's darkness, the door to the living room cracked just enough to see and hear them. My phone was in my hand, its microphone silently recording every word. Michael was pacing, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "Do you see this?" he snarled, thrusting the screen toward Emily, who was lounging on the new couch they'd probably bought on credit. "The account is frozen. I tried to pay the car loan, and it bounced." It bounced. Emily barely looked up. "Calm down, Michael. It's probably just a system glitch. Call the bank in the morning." "I already did," he yelled, throwing a magazine onto the floor. "They said the primary account holder locked it." "That's Dad, Emily. He did this." I pressed closer to the door, my knuckles white around my phone. It was Emily's reaction I was waiting for. She finally sat up, her calm expression hardening. "Your father? Why would he do something so spiteful?" "Because he's a bitter old man," Michael shot back. "He's been sulking ever since we asked for the repair money. He thinks he owns us." "One in cants of the eider, in the Routhers." A slow, calculating smile spread across Emily's face. "Well, then maybe it's time he leaves," she said softly. "This house is too big for him anyway. We could sell it, move somewhere better, somewhere modern. Sell my house, the one I built with Elizabeth, where her laughter still echoed in the walls if you listened closely enough. They weren't just greedy, they were heartless." Michael stopped pacing. "You think we can just kick him out?" Emily leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's old, Michael. He's vulnerable. We'll just tell everyone it's for his own good. We can say he's getting confused, forgetful. We can find him a nice little apartment somewhere. The house stays with us. It's only fair." Fair. The word burned in my ears. My thumb hovered over the phone, the recording timer ticking steadily upward. They were plotting to steal my life right under my own roof, oblivious to the fact that their conspiracy was being documented. "He won't go quietly," Michael mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "You know how stubborn he is." "Then we make him," Emily said, her voice sharp as ice. "We'll talk to a lawyer. We can look into getting guardianship. If he's declared incompetent, he won't have a choice. He can't stay here forever, dragging us down with him. It's a definitely." I eased back from the door, my boots silent on the tile. My phone vibrated softly as the recording saved, their poison trapped in its memory. They thought they could outmaneuver me, erase me from my own life. They had just handed me everything I needed to burn theirs to the ground. The next evening, I came home to find a new, gleaming brass lock on my front door. My key, worn smooth from decades of use, wouldn't fit. They had locked me out of my own home. A cold knot of fury tightened in my chest. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was a declaration of war. I circled the house, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The side door was locked too, a new deadbolt glinting in the porch light. They were trying to erase me. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister-in-law, Linda. "Henry, what's going on?" Michael called and said, "You're not well. Please call me." It is not road-related. They were poisoning the family against me, spinning their lies to anyone who would listen. The sting of betrayal deepened, but it wasn't despair I felt. It was fuel. I called Tom. They changed the locks, I said, my voice low, and they're telling the whole family I'm losing my mind. Tom let out a rough laugh. A bold move for a couple of amateurs. They're scared, Henry. That's why they're pulling this stunt. Don't let them rattle you. He was right. This was an act of desperation, but I needed to know their next move. That move came the following afternoon, during a hushed meeting at a small cafe with Sarah, Elizabeth's best friend. Henry, you need to know, she said, her eyes wide with worry. Michael and Emily are planning a big Christmas dinner. They've invited the whole family. They're going to make an announcement. What kind of announcement? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Sarah hesitated. They're going to tell everyone that you're mentally unfit. They want to get the family on their side to push for guardianship. So that was their endgame. A public execution, dressed up as loving concern. They would humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about, strip me of my home, my money, and my dignity, all under the warm glow of Christmas lights. They thought they could ambush me, use the holiday spirit to mask their betrayal. But they had just given me an opening. They had set the stage. All I had to do was rewrite the script. The day of the dinner, I made one last visit to John's office. We finalized everything. The eviction notices for Michael and Emily. The court order to freeze all their assets, backed by the evidence of their conspiracy. The letters to the bank, regarding their defaulted condo loan. I had recordings, bank statements, and even screenshots of Emily's texts to relatives where she was spreading the lies about my mental state. It was all neatly organized in a plain manila folder. "This is ironclad, Henry," John said, a grimly satisfied look on his face. "They won't see this coming." "They never did," I said. The dining room was aglow with candlelight. The scent of roasted turkey and pine hung in the air. The old oak table was draped in a white linen cloth, set with Elizabeth's best china. All our relatives were there, cousins, aunts, uncles, Linda, their faces a mixture of holiday cheer and nervous anticipation. Michael stood at the head of the table, a wine glass in his hand, a smug smile on his face. Emily sat beside him, a picture of perfect composure, her eyes glinting with victory. I sat opposite them, my hands folded calmly in my lap, the folder tucked beneath my chair. Michael cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice loud and practiced. "This Christmas is about family, and about moving forward. But before we begin, there's something we, as a family, need to address." His gaze flicked to me, a flash of disdain in his eyes. He raised his glass higher. "Dad, we've all been very worried about you. You're not well. This house, your finances, it's all become too much for you to handle. So, we've made a decision. We've voted. You are no longer a member of this family. It's time for you to leave this house." A collective gasp went through the room. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. Emily's smile widened, sharp and cruel. The guests stared, their eyes darting between Michael and me. They had heard the rumors, and now they were waiting for me to break. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. Every eye in the room was on me. "Is that so, Michael?" I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. "You've decided I'm done?" He smirked, emboldened by my calm. "It's for your own good, Dad. You'll thank us later." I reached under my chair and pulled out the manila folder. "A parting gift, then," I said, my tone light but edged with steel as I held it out to him. "Open it." He hesitated, his smirk faltering. He took the folder, his fingers brushing against it as if it might burn him. He flipped it open. The first page was an official eviction notice, addressed to Michael and Emily Wilson, giving them 30 days to vacate the premises. His breath caught. His hand trembled as he flipped to the next page, the court order freezing all their accounts. Then came the detailed list of their debts, the foreclosure notice on their condo, and finally, the full damning transcript of their recorded conversation, plotting to have me declared incompetent. "What is this?" he shouted, his voice cracking, his face draining of all color. The folder slipped from his nerveless fingers, the papers scattering across the table like dead leaves. "You can't do this." "We know dead aside is the prettiest timely hymn." "I already have," I said, my voice cold and clear. "You thought you could take my home, my life, and call it your own. It's all in there, Michael. Your debts, your lies, your own words. Emily snatched a paper, her face turning white as she read. "This is a lie!" she shrieked, but her voice shook, her composure finally shattering. The guests leaned closer, reading the papers, their whispers turning to murmurs of shock and then outrage. "Michael, is this true?" Linda demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You tried to sell his house behind his back?" He stammered, knocking over his wine glass, a splash of red spreading across the white tablecloth like a pool of blood. "No, it's not what it looks like." My cousin Tom snatched up the transcript. "Not what it looks like? This is a recording of you two plotting to kick him out. You called him a burden." The room erupted. Guests were on their feet, shouting, pointing. Emily's eyes welled up with tears of humiliation, not remorse. Michael lunged for the papers, trying to gather the evidence of his betrayal. But Linda pulled them away, her face a mask of disgust. "Enough, Michael," she snapped. "You've shamed this entire family." He turned to me, his eyes wide and pleading, the arrogant man from moments before replaced by a terrified little boy. "Dad, please, tell them it's a mistake. We didn't mean it." I met his gaze, my expression unmoving. "You meant every word," I said quietly but firmly. "You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." I turned my back on the chaos, on Emily's desperate apologies and Michael's broken sobs, and walked out of the dining room. I left them there, in the ruins of the life they had tried to steal. My new apartment is small, the walls still bare, but the wide window offers a stunning view of the Chicago skyline, its lights winking through the falling snow. The house is gone, sold to a young family who will hopefully fill it with the kind of love and laughter it hadn't seen in years. I walked away with enough to start over, here in this quiet space where the past can't cling so tightly. Michael and Emily vanished after that disastrous Christmas dinner, their belongings cleared out long before the eviction deadline. I haven't heard from them, and I don't expect to. Some bridges, once burned, turn to ash and blow away on the wind. I sit at my new desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow on a blank sheet of paper. I came here to find peace, but I know there's one last thing I have to do. I pick up a pen. "Michael," I write, my handwriting steady. "I have spent a long time wondering where I went wrong, but I've come to realize that your choices were never my fault. They were yours alone. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because I have earned my peace. This is goodbye." After so of the intaction, I fold the letter and slip it into an envelope. Forgiveness isn't a gift I'm giving to him. It's a gift I'm giving to myself. It's the final step in shedding the weight of their betrayal. I carried them for long enough. Sometimes the hardest battles we face are not with others, but with the ghosts of what we thought our lives would be. Betrayal from someone you love can feel like an ending, but I've learned that it can also be a brutal, painful, and necessary beginning. True strength isn't found in holding on to anger, but in having the courage to protect your own peace, even if it means letting go of a future you once prayed for. It's about building a new foundation, one that you, and you alone, control. This journey was one of the hardest of my life, but it led me back to myself. If my story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share your own thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.